Good evening and welcome to Dateline. I'm Lester Holt. Tonight, new information in a haunting headline-making case. It's been more than 6 years since George Smith vanished from a honeymoon cruise in the Mediterranean. No one has ever been arrested, and the investigation has at times seemed to grind to a halt. But now Dateline has obtained exclusive access to never-before-seen documents, photos, and depositions that may offer tantalizing new clues to what really happened on that ship.
In the absence of facts, rumors buzz that the casino manager hooked up with the drunken bride and took her to his cabin that night. In the more outrageous version of that, it was suggested that one or both of them then went down to the Smith stateroom and threw George overboard. But the detailed ship's documentation we now have suggests that neither of those stories is true. For starters, Jennifer Hagel and Lloyd Botha denied having anything to do with George's death. Both of them took an FBI polygraph, both passed. What's more, despite what Josh Askin said he saw that night, there is evidence that Lloyd did not in fact leave the disco with Jennifer, and for a good reason, says the Smiths' attorney.
He had a girlfriend on the ship, and there's a statement from Lloyd's girlfriend that puts him back in the room at 3:25. His girlfriend was there waiting for him.
So what's Jennifer's story? Numerous passengers told Royal Caribbean they saw Jennifer Hagel leave the disco alone. A cleaner on duty that night was seen getting into the elevator with her. The cleaner said he asked Jennifer if she needed help. He rode with her to the 9th floor and watched her make a right off the elevator, though her cabin was to the left. Around an hour later, ship staff found her passed out sleeping in this alcove. She was returned to her room in a wheelchair. When the cabin door was opened at 4:57 a.m., George was already gone. Jennifer went to sleep. So Jennifer and Lloyd were no longer considered suspects early in the investigation. But Josh Askin, the boy from California so eager to point fingers, found himself dead center on the FBI's radar screen. But when the Smiths' attorney, Mike Jones, took a never-before-released deposition in 2009 as part of the family's lawsuit over the George Smith estate, Josh Askin was anything but forthcoming.
In late June of 2005, did you go on a Royal Caribbean cruise with your family?
I invoked my Fifth Amendment right.
Even on the basics, Josh invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. And on the big questions...
Do you have a belief that George was murdered?
Invoke my Fifth Amendment right.
Were you present when George Smith was killed?
I invoke my Fifth Amendment right.
Did you play a part in the death of George Smith?
I invoke my Fifth Amendment right.
The Smiths' attorney doesn't buy that rationale for taking the Fifth.
If the truthful answer was no, then just say no. Why would you take the Fifth? I mean, a no answer can't hurt you. And then you think, well, maybe no is not the right answer.
Maybe the real eyebrow raiser to come out of Josh Askin's deposition is what Jones says Keith Greer did after the tape stopped.
His lawyer pulled me aside, and he said, I need to talk to you about something. And I said, what's that? And he said, you need to look at Greg Rosenberg. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, Greg Rosenberg left the party. And I said, the party that you guys claim took place after George was put to bed? And he's like, yeah, that party. He said Greg disappeared.
Greg Rosenberg, the Russian boy allegedly not digging into room service with the others, and therefore maybe without an alibi during that critical moment of the timeline when it's believed George Smith went overboard. What does he have to say for himself? But remember what happened at Josh Askin's deposition? According to the Smiths' attorney, Josh's lawyer pulled him aside to say Greg Rosenberg went missing from the room service party. When we asked Josh's lawyer about that directly, he denied ever telling the Smiths' attorney that Greg had gone AWOL. Do you tell him something like that?
You know, we didn't do that in the civil case. In talking with the FBI, they focused on that.
But there turns out to be a much bigger issue here than the head count of who was eating room service. And it all goes back to that documentation released by the cruise line. The ship, it turns out, keeps a detailed log of what time a room service order is placed, what cabin has ordered it. And you know what? In the early hours when George Smith went overboard, the log doesn't show any room service ordered by the Russians and Josh. Phone records do show calls going out to the kitchen from their room, but Royal Caribbean says no employee on duty that night remembers receiving those calls, taking an order, or delivering food to the boys when they claimed they had their big chow down. Greg Rosenberg's handwritten statement he provided Royal Caribbean after George Smith went overboard. In it, Greg Rosenberg doesn't say a word about a room service party. Smith family's attorney, Mike Jones.
Greg never mentioned being in the party or being in the room. He just said that he went to bed. So it does, you do sort of wonder exactly what the truth is.
Greg Rosenberg, Josh Askin, and the other boys have all denied any involvement in George Smith's death. And as intriguing as the Royal Caribbean documents are, they don't connect the dots, and they're not meant to. Those files are now in the hands of the FBI, which, it's important to note, has never publicly named a suspect or even said whether it's investigating an accident or a crime. But in recent months, the case has drawn the attention of the FBI's Russian organized crime squad in New York. Good news for the Smiths and everyone still hoping for a break in the investigation.
He's the key to everything, Josh Askin. Josh Askin knows what happened on the ship that night.
We haven't seen the room service, the alleged alibi photos, to see whether or not Greg's in the photos.
The real evidence is the film evidence from the securities cameras. Those tapes would answer the question, were there 3 or 4 boys leaving the room, right? Who left the room when?
But you definitely don't think it was an accident?
I don't think it was an accident, no.
Even Greg Rosenberg thinks there's more to the story.
Somebody hurt him, man.
You know who?
Something's hiding. Something's been covered up.
Now, 6 years later, the civil suits between the Smiths, Jennifer Hagel, and Royal Caribbean that once made headlines have been settled with no party admitting liability. Jennifer has remarried, but George's family refuses to move on. Amid the 6,000 pages of Royal Caribbean files, one piece of evidence above all others reminds George's family why they keep searching for answers. A new photo of the bloodstain, this one showing what looks like a bloody print of George's fingers as he apparently clung on for dear life before going overboard.
I keep going. We all keep going. Because we miss him, and he deserved better. He didn't deserve to be remembered as a blood stain on an overhang on a cruise ship.